This is the first time I've done a coloring book, and so I started with Esther, which is the last woman in the book, and I think the way I approached her was probably different than the last people that I did. I was very interested in the context of the stories of each of the women. So for instance, the book of Esther takes place in ancient Persia, and so I was looking up archaeological sites of Persia to see if I could find visual cues that would relate her story to the environment that the story takes place in. In the book, we're going through periods of barrenness when they really longed to have children, and there's usually someone else nearby who has been very successful at having children who is making them miserable. The Bible is a key part of my faith life. I feel like the characters of the Bible, the words, they come off the page and speak to me about the nature of God and the nature of our existence and our need for a Savior. And so reading the stories, I would just try to be as involved in the story so that I could relate to the woman and what, to me, she was going through. So it's not like my understanding or depiction of the story will be like anyone else's. Having taught a design class, I think that was one of the most helpful things to prepare me for doing this, because there are so many different ways to depict something. It doesn't always have to be with a deep space. And so in the Rahab spread, there is really not much suggestion of space at all. It's pretty flat. I think in the coloring book world, there's no such thing as too much detail. And so I could have kept going and going and going. This is a book not for artists necessarily, and so they shouldn't feel at all like they can't do any bit of it. You know, coloring can be very simple, but it can also be very complicated. A lot of people spend years studying color and the effects of color. So there's quite a spectrum of involvement in the coloring book. Knowing when to stop is always an issue. And I think for a while I felt bad not filling every space. But now that it's done, I like that there are some areas that you can either leave them so that it's not a chaotic page. Whenever I do anything, pretty much I broadly circle the project, and so that I'm kind of in the place of the project and it unfolds in my mind how it's going to look. So some of them I would get the idea of what I wanted, what part of the story I wanted to focus on, but then I had to decide how much am I going to show. And always had to remind myself, this is a coloring book. This is a coloring book. This is not it's an altarpiece or something. I'd look to art history books, because this subject matter, spiritual subject matter, is nothing new in art history, especially certain stories. And sometimes I would be inspired that way. When I was making the book, I was sort of imagining that people would either be with someone who was telling the story and was able to point out why these elements are in the pages, or that someone would read the story themselves. I think it would be a great thing to do. Across generations, young people and older people, just coloring together, sharing the stories and the coloring, both things that can be really enriching, I think.